So, the old question, which one of these is good, which one is bad, and why?
On the right is good.
The one on the right is good. Why?
I guess like decent flow, like text size from the top, like the main thing is the title and the biggest font, and then slightly smaller below it, and then even smaller for the body. And one of the left, like the top two lines is nearly the same size, and relax is big, and that's a weird word to emphasize. And then, like, the new rates for all seasons thing is quite large on the one on the left, but on the one on the right, it's sort of a small sort of footnote rather than a big thing.
So what do we learn from this?
Very creative.
Yes, you can. Is that a good thing? What do you mean with you can be very creative? All right. Meaning?
Like, only you can have text size that are just small, and say the last word is just huge. And kind of, well, in the paper, you can really do that. But it's more of a stand-up kind of thing.
The stand-up what?
Stand up. Well, it stands out.
Oh, stands out.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you think is the message that the left one sends?
It emphasizes certain things like relaxed and new methodologies rather than the second rate one.
And what does the right one communicate?
It's more sedate, like the way it's conveying relaxing rather than being big lettering. It's just sort of like a nice, simple, sort of fairly understated line.
So what we have here is 2 times the same text, but different messages. Right? So just by positioning the elements on the page, by giving them a visual importance, you essentially guide the viewer on the sequence of what he's supposed to look at. So what's the first thing you look at on the left?
Relax.
And what's the first thing you look at on the right? Yeah. I just did this now. Tuk. If you can please be the double button pusher, please. Right. So it is your responsibility to decide the sequence and the importance of the elements. What is that you want to communicate? When you are usually, when you do, for example, you take these pictures, you throw an eye tracker on the people, and you see what they look at. Usually, images score very high. It's kind of like what your eyes focus on first, right? And then it's usually the sequence of visual importance. So if you have a newspaper article, it's usually first the picture, then the big headline, And then you maybe read the sub-headline to see if you really want to continue reading it. If that's still interesting, maybe then you start reading the text, right? But it is your responsibility to decide the sequence. So if you do it on the left, it's like, okay, relax, okay, relax. But actually the sentence is ripped apart, right? The best way to relax. That's a slogan, but it's ripped apart. So it's not really good, right? And why is it the new room rates for all seasons include free room service is that important? Is it really that important? Well, it depends on the type of hotel, you know. So, for example, if you go down to, if we go to supermarkets here, we got Countdown, we've got New World, and we've got Pack and Save, right? Pack and Save, they go down the road of price, right? That's their message. We are the cheapest. And that's why also they, on purpose, look cheap. It is not a coincidence that they are just having yellow and black and very, very simple advertisement. It is made to look cheap. It is not that they've got a bad designer. It is really on purpose. It is to send the message, we're cheap. And it's no coincidence. So whatever it is that you want to communicate, it is your responsibility to get it across. Right. Composition. So what we have is, it's kind of like this funny thing. One of the most typical things, we had it a couple of times, didn't we, last time with the logo? That you place the logo in the center of the page. Right, that's the default that a lot of people choose for. And already last time I've been advocating like, wow, that's pretty boring. You know, there's many different places you can put a logo on a page. Right? But in any case, in case you do want to put something in the center, don't. Put it slightly above the center. There's a difference between the geometrical middle, where it's like dead centered, and you can take your ruler out and measure it, and it will be, and what looks right. It's a different story. So usually the rule of thumb is put it 10% higher, and then it looks like it is. The problem with the left one is that it looks like the sentence looks like it could fall down. And you don't want that. You actually want the sentence or the element to be firmly in the center of the page. And for that, it just needs to be a little bit higher. A very typical application for this is when you go to, if you ever still do that, is to print out a photo and frame it, right? And then you've got actually this, you know, cardboard around it. The bottom cardboard is always just a little bit bigger than the top one. It's just to position it rightly. So again, there's a difference between geometry and what looks good. And in most of the cases these days, you have to be sensitive enough to decide what looks good. It doesn't matter if it's geometrical in the center. What matters is that it looks good, and you're the one to decide. Right, composition. More bags of tricks of bag and a bag of tricks. The golden cut. As I said before, putting something dead center is just really boring, right? It's just, yeah. So one way of doing it is like you put it off center. But then of course the problem is like, okay, well, where off center? And then, you know, one of the tricks is to put it into the golden cut, and it's nothing else than a proportion, and the proportion is written down there, right? So if you have an element, could you pass me some toilet paper, please? It's not what you think it is. So let's say you have a piece of paper, and let's say it's landscape, and let's say you want a photograph of a person, right? Yes, what you can do, you can put him dead center, right? And then he's dead center. But it's boring, right? So what you do is you put them off center. Right? Looks a bit more interesting. And then what you do is you make him look in a certain way. Which way should he look? Left or right? Yes. Supposed to look left. And you get something more interesting. Compared to the person standing in the center. Well, where should he look now? Left or right? Well, that's just for the consistency reason. When you look like left. Right? So, tonight, probably you're going to watch some sort of movie maybe the news, maybe a TV show, whatever you do. Your task for tonight is you're going to look at the screen and look at where is the person on the screen. Right? I'm serious about this. Look at it. Look at the camera shots. And probably what you will see is that it is not in the center. At least not always. Sometimes, yes, they also do the center shot. Right? But quite often not. Right? The other thing that you notice, and it's the other thing that you usually don't notice, is the over-the-shoulder shot. Right? So usually when you have a person, talking to the camera or something like this, there's always the fuzzle, the shoulder, and the head of the person who's talking to. And actually takes quite a bit of screen space, and you usually don't even notice it. So tonight you're going to notice it. You're going to look at the over-the-shoulder shot, and you see but not just the person. It can be anything. It can be a building. It can be an animal. It can be a tree. Look at where they position the things on the screen. And since you are all so incredible smart, this is the proportion, and there's an easy way to remember it. 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34. What's the next number? That is correct. Do you understand why? I take it as a no. Would you please elaborate?
It's just each number is just the sum of the two previous numbers before. So it's 3 to 5 is 8, and then 5 and 8 is 13, 8 and 13 is 21, and so forth.
All right. So a ratio of 3 to 5, a ratio of 5 to 8, a ratio of 8 to 13. That's all the golden cut. It's an easy way to remember. Which of these is good? Which of these is bad, and why? Why?
Bottom left, you don't really know where to start. Whether to start on the left or on the right. And then I don't know what you call it, but it ends at different lengths. So, and it's a bit messy because the one on the left, it's the right one that's different lengths, and then the right column is the left side. So you see there's it looks messy.
Yes. Do you see any lines in there? Either yes or no. You have to say something.
Yeah.
Where?
It's middle super.
Oh, so here, over here. You mean this one? Yes. That's an interesting thing. If you have a text box, it generates a line, an axis. So even if you do not draw any lines, there are lines visible. Right? Here's one. Here's one. Here's one. Right? They all exist. They can look interesting. Over here, it's a bit too tight to the left, right? It's glued to the left. Like, why is that? Why are you sort of like hugging on the left? There's all this white space here empty. Why is that? Just a bit more to the right, maybe? Of course, here you got this jaggedness, which is chaotic. Well, maybe you want to communicate chaos. That's possible, right? Maybe you want to exactly send that message. Maybe that's the purpose of the page. That's the message you want to send. So it's not necessarily bad, but if you use it for a reason, not just because, right? Which of these is good? Which one is bad, and why? Say something.
Third one. The left, down left.
What about it?
Black and white is about compare.
Compares means?
Different color of the title.
Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Good thing.
It's a good thing.
It's more eye-catching than the others. That even though it doesn't have a lot of text, when it's text, it's more sticking to the right. But it does look like the contrast does make it look like as though it's filling the page.
But clearly there is a strong contrast there, right? A large black surface compared to a relatively white surface. So there's something you can play with, right? Contrast is one of those things to play with. What about the bottom right? Is there any contrast in there? No, it isn't, though. So maybe it's a bit boring, no?
Like the text bodies themselves are centered, but it's not like justified. It's
Yeah.
like the edge.
Correct. So it's also being hugged a bit to the top, right? Could be a bit lower. And when we talk about contrast, there's no contrast in there really. No. The top left, of course, good. The text is a bit far to the right. Could be also again maybe a little bit more on the left. This is what I meant with white space, as we talked about before in your reports, like in your report, for example. White space can be a good thing, right? Look at all this white space, right? White space is not nothing. White space is something for you to design. It's a big misunderstanding usually that you think like, oh, it's just space, it's nothing. I didn't do that. Of course you do that. You created, or in this case, I created this white space. I'm the creator of that. And it's a powerful thing, It's like, usually, because there's so much space, and you have a bit of text, you sort of like suggest that, oh, this is really important text, because that's the only thing on this big wide ocean, so it must be important. But if you go to a museum, you'll see that quite often, that they have lots of white space, right? And there's a little bit of text. Makes it look important. Okay, a couple of things names again you need to know? Oh yeah, it's a good one. Let's try that. Give me your report, please. I didn't even talk about that yet. You actually mentioned it, but can I borrow that piece of paper, please? The top paper. I'm so badly prepared. And can I borrow your pen first for a second? Thank you. Okay, so we're going to do one thing. So, ooh, nice pen. Okay, that's the spacing on the left. And, well, if we take it as a crop mark, this is the spacing on the right. Right? What do we see? It's different. Yes, it is different. Why is that? Sorry. Why is the inner margin bigger than the outer margin? Because this was designed by a LaTeX guy, and he did a good job with it, but he made this choice. It is not the same. Why did he make that choice?
I think it's well, when I first saw it, I thought it makes reading more interesting to shift it a bit.
There's a much more practical reason for it, and you actually did the right thing.
Yeah, it's like I have taken 3, 4 to 0.5. That's for binding purpose.
Exactly. With this one, it's not so obvious, but if you have something like this, and I hold it like this, and I open it, the first 1 or 2 centimeters, you can't even see. Right? That's why everything has to be more to the outside, so you can actually see. So again, there's a difference between the geometrical thing and what you actually see. Right? It's a binding thing. In any case, so we got the inner margin, we got the outer margin, we got the top margin and bottom margin. They do not all need to be identical for you to decide. You can have different columns, column spaces, column widths, and so forth. Oh, there's one more thing missing I should actually put on there, which is called bleed. That's an interesting one. We had this before, but let's talk about it. Let's say I don't have any colors here, so let's say this is a beautiful blue sky, right? And I want to print it, and I want to print it borderless. And then I want to bind it. So what's going to happen to my beautiful blue sky?
You're gonna like lose part of the edge of it because you're binding it, so
It's not the inner edge I'm concerned. So first of all, when you want to print borderless, can you do it in the lab? Do you know what borderless is? Borderless means that the image goes all the way to the edge of the paper. That means border. There's no border. So can you do that in the lab? Have you ever tried? Who has tried? Oh, hasn't even tried. Okay. So the answer is no, you cannot. Not directly. Because the laser printers that we have require a white stripe on the left and on the right to transport the paper. Okay. That's the easy answer. But the full answer is, of course you can. Just not in A4. So what do you do if you want to have borderless printing in our lab?
print it smaller and then cut it.
Yes, exactly. But then we're back at the cutting problem. We had it before with the crop marks. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen when you cut it?
You're gonna lose some of the edge maybe.
Yeah, so if this is the piece of paper and you cut it, the cutting will not be precise. And you certainly do not want to have a white little line here, you know, of your blue sky. You want it to really be in the blue, right? So what you do is you actually need a bit of extra space, right? So the crop marks will be here, so that when you cut, you will always be certain in the blue. Therefore, you will not have a white stripe, right? And this space over here is called bleeding. So, why does none of your reports have a noise picture on the front page? Yeah, right. I don't believe you. Because it's work? Okay, let's see your report. What's the title? Integrated detection of anomalous behavior of computer infrastructures. Anomalous? What is anomalous? Animal-like? No. Sorry, did I ask a difficult question? I thought it would be an easy one. Okay, let's take something else. Integrated detection. So it's the detections thing. So could it be Sherlock Holmes? You've got computer infrastructures. Well, you take a picture of, a big server room. Right? So you can certainly have a picture on here. Nice and big one. And why do we do that? Because people like to look at pretty pictures. They enjoy that. It looks good. That's why we do that. Go and buy a magazine. If you go to the magazines today, do the magazines look like this on the front? No, they all got nice print pictures, right? So do that. There are three things, it's an old joke, but it's true. There are three things that will always work with pictures, which are in advertisement. What works? What's the single most often used mechanism in images to sell you stuff? Sex, right? Nudity. That always sells stuff. What other things always sells? Money? No, you can't show money. Right, you could make people if you buy this product, then everybody will be envious of you. Yes, you can of course play that. Stars, yeah, that's another popular thing to do. People like to look at people. That's just one of the other things, but it kind of ties in a little bit with the sex thing. But the other two things are children, babies. Always works, right? Animals. Always works, right? The only golden rule is don't mix the three. Now, there is one other thing, and that is if you make a catalog or anything that has multiple pages, what you want to do is two things. One is that you want every page to have a bit of variation in it, right? Because if every page looks exactly the same, again, it's really, really boring to look at. Okay, if you read a book, that's acceptable because that's not the point about the book, right? But if you have a newspaper, a magazine, a brochure, anything, you want it to look a little bit different on every page, otherwise it's boring. However, you also want it to look like, well, this actually belongs together. It's kind of like a family resemblance. Right? So you want the pages to look alike, but not identical. And the way to achieve that is by a page grid. So what you do is that you create a grid, and then you can place the elements on there. And that makes sure that roughly, they are the same, but you've got enough flexibility so that you can place the elements wherever you want. So, for example, you could decide that these four, that will be an image. This thing will be text, this thing will be text, all three bottom ones are going to be an image. You can play with it. It's a bit like Lego. All right? And when you have this grid, you can then place your elements on top. And this is something where you reach the end of what Microsoft Word can offer. Word cannot do that. You cannot place elements freely in Word like that. Right? Page lines. Yes, if you want to, you can put lines actually in there. Horizontally, vertically, it's a typical thing to do, particularly in newspapers. If you do columns, what you want is that if this is sort of like, your margin, what you want is that actually the baseline of the last line is actually on there. You do not want this where it doesn't fit, right? Because you want all the pages to end at the same position. Now the trouble is that if you have a report, you cannot always predict what is on the page, right? So you might have a figure, or you might have an equation, you might have a headline. So you cannot always predict exactly where things will go, right? So it's a bit tricky. However, InDesign comes to your rescue. It has a built-in function called align to baseline grid. And what happens is that it will balance the lines out by slightly changing the line height, ever so slightly, so that in the end, it actually ends up there. Beautiful. Could I borrow yours again? Because you're the only one who's got this type of binding. If you do have a headline, and let's say you want the headline to go across, you can do that, right? You can design a double page if you want to, right? What is important is that this is the zone of death in here, because nobody can read it because of the binding, right? So you need to, have some extra space in the middle. And of course, break between words, extra spacing, right? So what do you think about this table? Say it again?
The columns have a very fixed width.
Yes.
They all have the same width.
Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
I think for like the names you connect with longer. If you're gonna expect longer names.
Do they also have the same row height? Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing?
I think it's a bad thing here because it's just inconsistent. Like there's no reason really other than that it can't fit it on one line. But maybe you could have not on that table. So the row height seems to be a little small anyway. Like it looks a bit sort of claustrophobic with the text.
What else is good or bad about this?
I mean, it's mostly because of the row height inconsistency, but the numbers being sort of forced up into the top left and the bigger ones doesn't look great.
Numbers, they are left here. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
If the numbers are in the middle, is better.
In the middle is better. So centered, you mean? Why is that better?
to me it'd give a bit of white space on the left as well as on the right, where it's just sort of slammed up against the left side. But you'd probably maybe put them in the middle, but still left justified. So rather than just being centered, because if they were just straight centered, the bigger numbers and smaller numbers on the budget thing would be sort of a bit chaotic looking.
Other opinions about this?
The titles are the same font, same size. There's no line really separating them. It's just looks like it's part of everything else.
Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Bad thing, that's it.
Mm.
The same with the text on the side. It's there's nothing separating really where it says adventure and then role playing and the name of it. It's all the same font. That's not good.
So we were talking about this before, about visual hierarchy. You have to guide the reader about what to read in which sequence. So what do you look at here first? I know, right? How about that? So let's do it. Ah. 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 You see the difference? So what is different here?
The numbers are right justified, text is left.
Why?
Oh, well, not all of the numbers. It makes kind of like a split between...
What do you mean with properly classifying?
When you first look at it, you can find the classifications more clearly than the previous table.
Okay, that's the classification on the left. That's correct. And the numbers? What was about the numbers?
Sort of like a split, like all the left justified stuff is like categorizing things, names, IDs, and then on the right it's all like units sold, quantities, budgets type stuff. So it's nice.
I think you put it right justified so you can see where it's clear thousands or hundreds.
Exactly. If you do them right justified, the numbers, that the longer the number, actually the separators, might be, if you would have a comma, it would be afterwards, or the thousands. It's always at the exact same position. See? The thousands. So you can always tell the big number from a small number, right? If you have the same thing here, it's like, okay, now the 1,000 is here, now the 1,000 is here, now the 1,000 is here. It jumps. So it's not so easy to see. So we got that. We got here the categorization, right? That the categories are clear, right? Line height is consistent, right? If the numbers are not, if they're all 4 digits, you might as well also do them left. It doesn't matter so much, right? It's just when they actually have different length, that is important. Interestingly, you don't need to have it bold. It's not necessary even. Just the extra line does the trick. There is the caption. Very important. And you can refer to that in the text. Table 1 shows. Da-di-da. The same thing for captions are important also for images. There should always be a caption, at least when we talk about scientific and academic reporting. It's always a caption, and then you can always have to refer to it in the text. You cannot just throw a picture in there just like that. Academic. When we talk about advertising and newspapers, yes, of course you can just throw a picture in, right? But for academic, no. You need to talk about the picture. There must be a reason why they are in there. References. So, who of you used LaTeX, which is good because it has it does all your references pretty much automatically, which is a nice thing, right? But who of you, on top of that, is using a reference manager software? What is that? Sorry?
Zebra is a reference managing software.
Okay, which one is that?
JABIE, Xamarin.
Okay, I do not know that one. The ones that I know is EndNote, and then there is Mendeley, and there's some other ones, some free ones these days available. No matter which one you use, please use one, because it makes your life so much easier. Do not do references manually. It will kill you. And the style of it is completely predefined, at least in academia. You can just say APA, and then it's completely predefined, and you don't have to worry about it. Do not do it by hand. It's just too much work. Which of these is good? Which one is bad, and why?
I mean, bottom left title explains itself. Looks really weird with all that white space between the words.
Well, yeah, it does indeed. I was making it too easy for you. Okay. So, top right, uppercase, is always a bit more difficult to read. It's not it's a forbidden zone, it's just more difficult to read. Why is it more difficult to read?
The names is the same.
Well, it will get a bit longer, of course, yes, but that's not what makes it more difficult.
The title is usually shorter than the paragraph.
Right. But the question I was asking was, why is uppercase more difficult to read?
Because the letters are fixed height.
Yes. And what does that mean for a human being?
Like recognition, for example, if there is P and there is F, or E and F, you have to look in detail to recognize which one it is.
So what you see is that this line is just a line, right? Here it goes up and down, right? So when people read, they do not read every letter. The way we read is, one of the ways we read is just by the outside shape of the word. We just recognize the shape. We don't read it. Right? You would only do that if it's like you encounter a word you've never read before. Then you might actually read it. But other than that, it's just patterns. You look at the pattern. And in the uppercase, there's less information because you don't have a line up there. It's just flat. Right? So it's a bit more difficult to read. Of course, obviously here, you don't want to have a break in there. It's silly. Justified, it's a bad idea because of these wide gaps. You see the gaps? That doesn't look good at all, does it? What do you think about this one?
I mean, the top one doesn't really have enough space between the heading and the text. The G is hanging down real close to it.
Maybe this.
At the level one, if people usually just reading the heading, they will ignore the text.
Yeah, so that's the first thing I look at is they read the headings, and then they go into whether they're actually really going to read the text. That's clear. So we talked about before about visual importance. So what is the most important thing here?
Top one.
Which one?
Heading a middle one.
So First look at this, and then you look at, and then you look at. Hard to say. So what's the problem with this one? So the difference here, the visual importance between these two is not big enough. It's not clear enough that this is a headline. What about this one?
Jumped to next.
It's big. So we've got also a difference between these two and these two, right? In terms of visual importance, right? So is that sort of like equally spaced importance?
No, I think the top one looks a lot more important. Like,
so this difference is much bigger than this difference, right? How about that? You see the difference? Much more harmonic. And the visual importance is more balanced. We had section headings. You had it in your report, right? You had the title on the main chapter on the left, that subtitle on the right. You can do that, right? But again, there are many different ways of doing it. And again, if you do LaTeX, it does whatever it does, no control. That's the point of LaTeX. You don't want to bother, right? But hey, we're doing design here, so we do bother. So if you do something like this, yes, do something. There are many different ways of doing it. Yes, the indication of paragraphs. That's an interesting one. There are two ways of doing it. How do you indicate the start of a new paragraph?
line break, or indented.
Yes and no. No and yes. So line break is the one thing you're not supposed to do. So if you are in text, in Word, even Word has something called paragraph spacing. It defines how much space is supposed to be between paragraphs. If you just hit the return key one more time, I'm going to smack your face, because this is really horrible. That's not what you're supposed to do. If you want to define paragraph spacing, that is fine. And there should be, of course, paragraph spacing, but it should not be equivalent to an extra line. That is just for people who do not know how to do paragraph spacing, right? So, a little bit less than a line is usually a good thing. And you will see how great of a difference it makes. The only thing is that you need to have a little bit of white, yes, but it's okay, right? Oh, if you have headlines, the spacing should not be identical. So does this now belong to this, or does this belong to that? Unknown. You have to move it closer to where it belongs to. So the paragraph spacing, or the spacing before headline, has to be bigger than afterwards. So that these two elements, it's clear that these belong together. The intent that we did before is also possible, right? You can do intents, that's perfectly fine as well. But two things to remember: don't do both. You can't do intent and paragraph spacing. That is silly. And the other thing is, if you start something, this white space I don't want to see, because there's no paragraph before it, so there's no reason to have an intent. So it has to start first with a non-intent. And the same for headlines as well. Oh, we had lists, didn't we, somewhere? But you did all LaTeX, so it's a bit unfair. Usually what would happen is you would make mistakes, and I can point out the way to do it. And the reason, again, is that I want you to make these mistakes, because it's only out of mistakes that you learn. Right? So this time I just have to tell you. The thing about lists is that you can't even see this as a list, right? So what you need is you need to have a clear indicator. Okay, this is a list, and these are kind of the points. It doesn't have to be points. There's all sorts of little symbols you can use for that. The second thing is that the spacing between the list items has to be bigger than a line spacing, so that it's clear that these two lines belong together. They belong together, and this is a new item. These belong together. This is a new line item. Over here, it always looks the same. So it's no visual grouping. It's not grouped into an item, right? And the other thing important, which actually I didn't do, I should do that, is I screwed up here, that this should actually be, on the same line as this. I didn't do that right here. Right, so there's a little bit of literature you can have a look at. If you do graphs, there's a book called Show Me the Numbers, and it's a pretty good introduction just to use graphs properly. I like this book, 22 Tips on Typography. It's a wonderful book. It's like on the way, if you read front to back, it tells you what to do. And if you read back to front, it tells you what not to do. It's really lovely, really well done. Typography book was also pretty good. There is Making and Breaking the Grid, a book only about page grids. If you go for the web, again, the idea has actually passed over to the web design as well. So there, you also need a page grid, but it's a bit technologically a bit more challenging. So there are two frameworks, which is called 960 and YAML. And what they essentially do is that they provide you with a grid. You define the grid, and then you only tell it, put this graphic in that quadrant, or in that box, or so forth. And it does all the rest for you. It's pretty important. So for next week, you got two tasks. One is that you redo your report, ideally using InDesign so that you are in control. And secondly, I want you to do a poster. Again, we want to be reasonable with the workload. So if there's something you have to make a poster about anyway, maybe another assignment, maybe a conference, maybe a presentation for your club, maybe an advertisement for your, I don't know what, maybe you have a garage sale, you want to make a poster for a garage sale, I don't know. Feel free to use something that you can use as well later on. And I want you to print it in A0. It's important that you mount the poster, and please ignore the date because that's what's wrong. And I want you to mount the poster. What do I mean with mounting? What is mounting?
Putting it on some sort of surface.
Yes. And why do we do that?
Because a poster is just paper, you can't really hold it up or anything.
Exactly. That's why we mount. So a couple of considerations for that. Who is this poster for? In what circumstances are you going to present it? It's a whole different story about whether you make a poster that's going to go on a bus stop. Or just today I passed over the bridge where Bunnings is, and they've got this gigantic poster. And the reason why I looked at it was because UC has a poster on there. I was like, oh, UC, what's going on? And I'm in a car, right? A completely different story than a poster for a conference, right? Or your student work, you're supposed to do a poster presentation, right? You stand there next to it and you talk to people. Completely different story, right? So think about who is this poster for? How and when will it be shown? And how much time will you have? I'm not sure why I wrote this down. I thought it might be two things I don't remember exactly what I meant, but two things. One is that be realistic. You've got a week, right? So it's not a lot of time. So you have to be careful with your ambitions. The other thing is that when you are with posters, let's say you are standing next to it, how much time do you have to talk to people, right? This report If you have 30 seconds to talk to somebody, you're not going to cover this, right? If you drive by with a car, you've got 3 seconds at best, 2 seconds hopefully. That's all you have. If you have a poster session and somebody comes up to you and says like, oh, what is this poster about? Tell me about it, blah, 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 blah. Whole different story, right? So you need to be careful with how much information you put on there and what information. All right? Questions about that?
We can't print A0.
No, you cannot. So where would you print this? Yeah, that's one place, yeah. And how are you going to mount it? Don't know?
Couple.
Well, recently the student surprised me with being extremely creative, and I really liked it. Okay, anyway, so there is cardboard, right? It's one material that you can use, of course. Disadvantage of this is that it's heavy. If you do this in A0, it gets heavy. Maybe not so good. The other problem is, how are you going to glue it? So what happens if you take a lot of glue and you put it over your own paper and you stick it? It gets wet. And what happens when it gets wet? It wrinkles. You don't want that. No wrinkles. So have a think about how to mount it. That's one way of doing it. The other surprising thing is where I was really, I should have thought about it earlier, is these days you don't even have to print on paper anymore and then mount it onto a foam board. You can actually print on the foam board directly. Well, there are companies who do that. Which is kind of convenient. So I've recently been to a place and I had to work with them, and the machine that they have, 5 meters wide. That's how big they can print. So gigantic. So, but even then, there are all sorts of different materials they can print on. Seriously, they can print on wood. You can give them a sheet of wood and they can print on it. You know, there's all sorts of things you can do. So be creative. Do something nice. Surprise me. Okay? So, report, poster, next week.